Hey everyone, prepping for rounds today. We're going to do a deep dive on Alcaligenes faecalis.
Alcaligenes
We're
faecalis.
using MicroWiki and MicroCanvas
Yeah.
as our sources. And yeah, this one's pretty interesting.
It is. It's not just some bug lurking in the hospital water pipes.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
Okay.
So it is a gram-negative bacillus. Pretty
Yes.
standard. But one of the things I saw in the research was all this talk about Peritrachus flagella.
Right.
And I'm wondering what the clinical significance is of that.
Well, like imagine this little Alcaligenes faecalis, and it's covered with all these like little hairs, and they're all like whipping around,
Uh-huh.
and it allows it to move through fluids really, really well, and it's got great motility. So in these moyed environments, around the hospital, sinks, drains,
Yeah.
even medical equipment.
Oh, wow.
This thing can really get around.
So that's kind of scary, actually, when you think about it in terms of opportunistic infections,
Yeah.
particularly in immunocompromised patients.
Right. Alcaligenes faecalis is usually, sort of a benign resident of the human gut,
Yeah?
but it can cause some real problems in people who are, immune suppressed or
Yeah.
immunocompromised. And it's not just, from being, exposed to it, in the environment, but it can also contaminate medical devices like nebulizers and
Right.
respirators, dialysis systems even.
And I know that MicroCanvas mentioned that they found it in mixed cultures from diabetic foot ulcers.
Yeah, that was a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
It kind of, suggests that it could be contributing to those complex infections.
Yeah.
Maybe not as a primary pathogen, but just being there, mucking things up,
Yeah, complicating things for sure.
complicating things.
So I guess let's get into the specific types of infections
Okay.
that it can cause.
All right.
What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, I mean, most commonly, you'll see it, causing urinary tract infections.
Okay.
But it can also cause things like postoperative endophthalmitis.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Which is, those pictures on MicroWiki or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll stick with you for sure.
Like, ugh.
And then for people who are on peritoneal dialysis, they could get peritonitis if their catheter gets contaminated.
Right, exactly.
So pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, it's, a reminder that, even these bugs that we think of as kind of, not that big of a deal
Yeah.
can really, pose a significant threat in the right clinical context.
For sure. For sure. So we've talked about pathogenicity. We've talked about the clinical features.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious now, like, what is there about Alcaligenes faecalis that maybe we won't find in every textbook?
Yeah.
What's something that will surprise our listeners?
Well, this might surprise you, but Alcaligenes faecalis can actually tolerate some pretty high arsenic environments.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty unusual.
So it's not just surviving.
Right.
It's actually thriving in these harsh environments.
And it's not just tolerating it, it's actually metabolizing it.
Oh, wow.
It's taking the more toxic arsenite and converting it to the less harmful arsenate.
So maybe we can use it to, like, clean up contaminated sites.
Exactly. That's one of the things that makes it, potentially important in bioremediation.
So wait, so it can clean up arsenic, and it can also, it's a heterotropic denitrifier.
Right.
So it breaks down nitrites, ammonium, using organic carbide as fuel.
Yep, multi-talented.
Wow, busy little bug.
That's right.
What else can this thing do?
Well, here's another thing that's kind of interesting about it. Most bacteria, especially gram-negative bacteria, can't do this, but Alcaligenes faecalis can actually desaturate fatty acids aerobically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it doesn't need oxygen-free conditions to do that, which is kind of unusual.
That is interesting. So just to recap, because I always get this confused.
Okay.
It's gram-negative?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good.
Gram-negative with those Peritrachus flagella.
Right, right. And those flagella help with the motility.
That's right.
Which we talked about.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay, so for all those folks in the lab,
All right.
let's talk about culture characteristics.
Okay.
How do we ID this thing on different medias?
Okay, so on blood agar,
Okay.
you're going to see these whitish kind of feathery colonies with irregular edges.
Okay.
Sometimes they even produce a fruity odor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and some strains can actually cause alpha hemolysis.
Uh-huh.
So you might see that green discoloration around the colonies.
Okay, that's a good visual cue.
Yeah.
What about McConkey agar?
It will grow on McConkey.
Okay.
But you won't see any lactose fermentation.
Okay.
And a key point for identification, it won't grow on blood agar under anaerobic conditions.
Got it.
So this bug needs oxygen to grow.
Okay, so we got the visuals down.
All right.
Let's go through some other, like, key characteristics of this thing.
Okay.
Rapid fire, what are some of the things that people need to remember about Alcaligenes faecalis?
Okay, so it's motile, it's oxidase positive,
Uh-huh.
it's catalase positive, it's indole negative.
Okay.
It's alcohemolytic, it's vancomycin resistant, and colistin susceptible.
Okay.
And as we mentioned, some strains have that interesting fruity odor.
Okay. Wow, that was a lot.
Yeah.
I think we've covered some good ground here, but before we move on, I think it'd be fun to test your knowledge with a couple of questions about Alcaligenes faecalis.
Oh yeah, exam style.
Exam style, are you ready?
Bring it on.
All right, question number 1. Where is Alcaligenes faecalis commonly found in the environment?
I'll give you a hint. Think about where you might find, moisture and potential sources of contamination in a hospital.
Okay, so like soil water
Uh-huh.
and hospital equipment.
Yeah, those damp spots around hospital equipment.
Yeah.
It's pretty ubiquitous in those environments.
Right, and that's why it's so important for us, as medical microbiologists, to really understand this bug.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 2. What is that unique characteristic of Alcaligenes faecalis that most other bacteria, especially the gram-negatives, don't have?
Remember our discussion about fatty acids?
Yeah.
What can Alcaligenes faecalis do that most other bacteria need oxygen-free conditions for?
Oh, yeah. It can desaturate fatty acids aerobically.
That's right.
Got it.
Pretty neat trick for a gram-negative.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, question number 3. Let's talk clinical presentations.
Okay.
What kinds of infections are we looking for?
So think back to our discussion of pathogenicities.
Yeah.
What were some of the key clinical features that we highlighted?
We talked about UTIs. We talked about postoperative endophthalmitis, peritonitis, especially in those peritoneal dialysis patients.
Right.
And then we also talked about that potential role in those complex mixed infections.
Yeah, like those diabetic foot ulcers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty good overview of the clinical spectrum.
Right. Hit me with question number 4.
Okay, this one has to do with bioremediation. Why might Alcaligenes faecalis be a useful tool for cleaning up contaminated environments? Remember that unusual tolerance it has?
Oh, yeah, the arsenic.
That's right.
Yeah, so it can survive in these high arsenic environments.
Uh-huh.
And it can actually metabolize the more toxic arsenite to the less harmful arsenic.
Exactly. It's like a little detoxification machine.
That's pretty awesome.
It is.
Okay, what's that last question?
All right, last but not least, let's test those lab skills. What are the key culture characteristics of Alcaligenes faecalis on blood agar and McConkey?
Okay, so blood agar, we're going to see those whitish, feathery colonies with the irregular edges.
Yes.
Maybe a fruity odor sometimes.
Sometime.
And then there's the potential for that alpha hemolysis.
Yep.
The
right.
green discoloration.
Uh-huh.
On McConkey, it'll grow, but no lactose fermentation.
Right.
And importantly, no growth on blood agar under anaerobic conditions.
That's right. It needs that oxygen.
It needs that oxygen. Okay, so 5 for 5.
5 for 5, you're ready for rounds.
I feel much more confident about this bug now.
Good.
But before we completely move on, we talked about how Alcaligenes faecalis can cause infections.
Right.
But we also talked about how it could be useful for bioremediation.
Uh-huh.
So it seems like it can be both a friend and a foe.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It really highlights the complexity of the microbial world.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white.
It's not, you're right, it's all about context.
Exactly.
In a healthy person, maybe it's just hanging out in the gut, doing its thing.
Right.
But then it can also cause these really serious infections.
Yep.
Contaminated equipment, maybe even play a role in complex wounds.
And yet it could also help us clean up, contaminated environments.
Exactly.
Help us develop new bioremediation strategies.
So I guess the takeaway here is that we can't just label these microbes as good or bad.
Right.
We have to understand their role in these different contexts.
Absolutely.
And use that knowledge to, help us make clinical decisions.
Exactly.
Do our research.
It all comes down to context.
Okay, I think we've covered just about everything on Alcaligenes faecalis. Any final thoughts for our fellow medical microbiologists out there?
Yeah, just keep learning, keep exploring, and never underestimate the power of these tiny organisms. They can really surprise us.
Well said. And if you come across a strain of Alcaligenes faecalis with that fruity odor, let us know. We're still looking for the most fragrant strain.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those microbes in check.
That's crazy, right? Like we spend all this time trying to fight microbes.
Yeah.
And then you look at something like Alcaligenes faecalis, and it's like surviving in arsenic.
Right.
It really makes you appreciate just how adaptable and resilient these organisms are.
It's a good reminder that we still have so much to learn about the microbial world.
And they've been evolving and adapting for billions of years, long before we came along.
We think we're so special, but really the microbes are running the show.
They really are. They're essential for life on Earth.
Absolutely.
And they're constantly changing the environment.
Shaping and reshaping.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important for us as medical microbiologists to really try to understand them
Yeah.
Not just how they cause disease, but how they interact with each other, how they interact with the environment.
The little
It's
picture.
like a giant puzzle.
It is.
And each microbe is a little piece.
And the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
It does.
So for all of our fellow microbe enthusiasts out there listening,
Yeah.
what would you say is the biggest takeaway from our deep dive on Alcaligenes faecalis today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that context is everything.
Yeah.
Alcaligenes faecalis can be harmless, it can be a problem, it can be useful.
Right.
It all depends on the circumstances.
So we can't just label microbes as good or bad.
Nope.
We have to understand their different roles
That's right.
in different environments.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've given everyone a pretty good overview of Alcaligenes faecalis.
I think so.
Any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
Just keep those minds curious and never stop exploring.
Well said. And hey, if you happen to find a strain of Alcaligenes faecalis with that fruity odor,
Yeah, let us know.
we want to hear about it. We're still on the hunt.
All right, until next time, keep those minds curious and those microbes in check.